Okay, 21 Moon. Hey, I got it all set up. And looks like I might even have the camera aligned reasonably. Alright, so yeah, it's kind of weird to do a review here, and it's going to be a little different flavor than some of my other reviews. Because the intention of this was really more as a playtest video set than anything else. Although, playing through it, showing it on video, etc., might be useful in terms of, hey, if they are going to release, the completed version at some point in the near future or whatever, well, maybe it'll generate some buzz, and that'd be cool. I'm always in favor of anything, really. Okay, so first thing I want to say is they did a really great job. I mean, I shouldn't be reviewing components on a playtest version, right? Or on a preview version. I've done that too. But when I'm impressed with the components that I'm getting, first of all, the wood components. These are guys, I think, who are used to doing print and play of 18xx games, putting together sets, etc. Maybe somebody buys one and everybody else makes a copy. I don't want to think about it too much. You can buy Deep Thought. You can buy from Deep Thought. You can buy all the files, and then do a print and play version. And in a sense, you get, you can arrange it so that it's what you want, instead of. Although they make really good versions, and I know Clearclaw does that. So yeah, I mean, overall, the quality of the playtest version is well beyond what I would be able to make. You don't want to know what I make. If you've ever seen any of my print and plays, you'd understand. But nicely laminated product, etc. Okay, but beyond that. Let's talk a little bit about what makes this special in particular. And the first thing that really strikes my mind, at least, is the track tiles. Very, very limited number of track tiles. And in general, there's a fair number of the yellows, but they run out. There's like one of every other tile. So if you need a particular tile and it ends up on the board, you end up with this different kind of track limitation than most of the other games have. First of all, the sort of canon of the 29 and 30 style games generally give you shitloads of tiles, and your big limitation is how much track can you lay. And then some of the other games allow you to lay multiple tracks like this does. What comes most to mind as doing something maybe kind of similar to this, and I feel, I may be guessing just out my ass, but I feel a lot of 1880 influence here, which makes sense, because I know a couple of people who are like, 1880 is their absolute favorite of all the 18xx's that are out there. And it does provide some very interesting things, but where that game limits your stock, your track placements through this weird sort of extra mechanism of being able to have building permits and all kind of stuff like that, which is really kind of a plan before you start playing even. I mean, before you start a corporation, you decide which permits and when it's going to be allowed to build how much, and therefore how much it's going to expand at what points in the game. Instead of that, this doesn't add any kind of really complex, extra rule system. What it adds or subtracts actually is tiles. So it takes so many tiles away that it becomes very, very difficult to set your track up the way you want it. And in fact, you could end up as the second company that started in the game that I played, without the ability to start your corporation. Now that can happen in 1830 too. Especially if like the C&O starts, and then like the D&H might not be able to start or something like that, because it needs that track tile. That's the NYC, not the D&H. The D&H is a private. So it's got that kind of tightness, but the tightness just keeps going and going and going. And towards the end of the game, you find that, well, I have the only tile of that type, and the only upgrade of that is here, and I can't get at it, and I can't figure out what to do about it. That's gonna, so for me, one of the problems with doing that, this is not a mechanism I generally like. I'm always kind of tempted to try playing sometime with an unlimited tile set. You can play whatever you want, wherever you want. Something that is easier to do on the computer than anywhere else. Although, you could mix together a bunch of different games and manage it, or make your own tiles or whatever. Uh, given that, given that I don't generally like the kind of thinking involved in, oh shit, I have to replace this. And in terms of trying to apply to the subject matter, it's very hard to explain, and I can do a little hand-wavy or a better hand-wavy explanation for it here than anything I can think of in the rail games, having to do with pieces being shipped up and stuff like that, pre-formed pieces. Given all the given that it doesn't seem to provide any kind of extra realism to have this kind of limitation on the tracks, and that I find it kind of usually a painful limitation in games, I thought I would really not like what was going on here. Well, it turns out it's so harsh that I kind of like it. Kind of reminds me of Crayon Rails in that sense. Like, I always hated Crayon Rails. There was the possibility you could run out of money. But then we started making harsh Rails where, like, everything became much uglier. And I kind of liked that too. This isn't for that reason, though. This does actually introduce some interesting different decision-making mechanisms than I think I've seen in any other XX game, just by that extreme limitation on the tiles. Now, let's keep going with other things. Floating the corporations. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. The means of floating the corporations, where you're allowed to throw a bunch of shares out of the corporate initial offering into the open market and fund your corporation that way. And that's the basic mechanism for floating your corporations in this game, because you're never allowed to hold more than 50% of the company, and 50% is what floats it. And you don't have enough cash to float a corporation without using this mechanism. So here they've added a different game mechanism, but it's a very appealing one, because you're making a trade-off between shares that are inside, that are available in the corporation versus shares that are producing money for the corporation. Just because of the way there's other rules that interact to do that, the way the dividends are paid out in this. If it's in the initial offering, it pays into the corporate treasury. If it's in the bank pool, it doesn't pay out. It's in the general public and nobody can use it. What's kind of neat about that, well, it allows you to float a corporation with less money, but you do have this interesting set of choices. And I feel like normally in an XX game, the question is, well, how high can I float it? And that is the only question. Here it's kind of, how high can I float it? And how much of those shares do I want to be released from that initial offering just into the bank pool? Because those are shares that are not going to make me more money. So if I float it very high, I definitely have to release shares. Now, I found in 5 players, it did not make a lot of sense to not capitalize on as much money as possible. But that, I think there's more subtlety to the decision making than I showed in my play, and certainly more than I had in my initial play. I actually looked at it more in this. Let's keep thinking. Some other features of interest. Well, the fact that you have these kind of, your cities in this game are these mineral resource things. Not the only cities. You have your base camps, which are fixed value. But you have these cubes mixed in. I think these were all sorted better. I've got a lot less bags that I'm using than they sent me. But you've got cubes that indicate the type of resource you have, and that follows this chart here. Well, what does that mean? Well, a few things. One of the biggest ones is the map is randomized each time you play, unless you choose not to randomize it, right? You could preset it or whatever. There might be specific maps that they could say, these are interesting maps that we really like, that might be an interesting thing to put forward. And as any group could say, oh wow, that was an interesting map, I'd like to play that again and record it. That's one side of it. Another side of it is the cities don't always, we're calling them cities, don't always increase in value. In fact, the ones that are fixed on the map will decrease in value as the tile colors increase. In this, it's a mix. And I don't know how balanced these are, but I don't know how much that matters, right? A 10-point Doinker city, which is sort of the equivalent of these white magnetite that are always $10, with one exception that you can dot them. That's the big difference. A 10-point Doinker city, in an 1830 game, well, here at least they get mixed around. You're not always playing with that same fixed map. So you do have resources that go down in value, though. And boy, that can be confusing. Because the tendency is to build up your hex, the size of your hex, and that's supposed to be, those resources are easily depleted, whatever. And obviously you can give excuses for why it works that way. How does the mechanism work in play? Well, I mean, it's interesting. I don't find that it adds that much to have those decreasing ones. Although, again, it does add something that is kind of cool, which is that, first of all, you have to make this decision between early money and late money. So, if you look here, the one thing, Amalquite or whatever, is the decreasing one, along with the base camp, which isn't that great. And then you have other progressions. So like red starts out as good as the base camp, but it eventually gets better. You probably want to be nearer to reds than near Amalquites. But your initial runs can be good. That can give you money that can invest later. I don't feel like that differential is worth the differential if the color tiles change later in the game. So like red goes from 30 to 60, whereas this Amalquite goes from 40 down to 20. And 20s late in the game suck, On the other hand, there's 3 of these Source X tiles, and they start out a little weaker, but they go up to 80s, which are, as good as anything on the board. If you can get that on a double doink that you can hit twice, well, that's worth a shitload of money, and anybody who can reach that gets a lot of bonus. There are some things, obviously, so I went through the rules and went through lots of, corrections and everything. Part of that is I'm trying to give that playtest experience to whatever extent I can this way. I'm not trying to criticize what's going on here. I told the designer of the game, this is better rules that I've seen in some published games. For all that criticism I lay on it, I'm just trying, to give whatever help I can in terms of pointing out specific things that could be confused, that I confused, or whatever. So there were a couple of choices with the components that I've pointed out. For example, the cubes and the lookup table. That's a hard burden on the players, and there's some ideas kicking around on how to fix that, which appeals to me. Obviously, the double doinks, some better, a second look has to be made at how they are. I think there's a serious mistake on those, and this one is probably the hardest to actually fix. Each of the private companies is very, very individual. Okay, so that's the case in almost all of the 18xx games that have privates. You know, there might be one kind of totally vanilla private, but each of the others has a couple special rules. But these have a block of text on them each. There's a few things that should be done. First of all, the key information on it should be better highlighted. And obviously that's just a graphic design issue. But also that amount of text, there's some information in that text that probably should be popped out better. So for example, how the private company goes away. And then also, well, in some cases the wording is easy to confuse if you're a poor little bear of little brain. Yes, I managed. Another design choice here that's just really a graphic design choice, the stock certificates. And I put on the top the one that's got a misprint on all of them. I'm getting just a minor thing that needs to be fixed. But the stock certificates being this small, you know, so there's this is one of many of these kind of, well, that's odd because I haven't seen that in another XX game. I can see advantages to it. It takes up less table space. It's kind of nice. On the other hand, it is a little less attractive. I don't know which way to go on that. Most of my life, I've been like, oh, fine, you know, I always have enough table space to play an XX game because we were either playing them at my house or a friend's house where we basically had conference tables for gaming, or at you know, a big dining room table, whatever, or at a campus where there were huge conference tables that we could slam together and play. And actually, part of the problem was always, well, geez, you know, we can't get everybody around the table because the table goes on for 8 feet and we're all clustered at one end. But the small size, you know, is a little bit more appealing. I've been playing at the game store recently, and like there are times when definitely space has been an issue there, and I imagine it is in other places. Of course, you know, it's a big ass map. It's going to take up a certain amount of space. The question is just, you know, how much do you want to spend on certificates? Limiting the amount of stuff that's on one of these, I don't know. I don't know if that's a permanent choice. See, they use up the entire map. It contains some extra information on there. And that extra information is... Some of that information, I did find it kind of painful. Like, you know, if you want a token, okay, look, I had my thing about walking over to read the token, but honestly, just reaching over the whole map to grab the token as opposed to having them here directly in front of you. Somebody else could bump them and you don't know how many tokens you have anymore or whatever. And there's something kind of nice about having all your crap on one little thing. Now, you could do that, there's no question. The certificates probably should stay over in that if there's not space here to define them. What else? It's a fixed number of operating rounds with certain events happening based on the operating round instead of based on the fall of the trains. And that's kind of interesting because, again, you have competing things, you have competing timelines. Time is not just how quickly the trains come out. In fact, it kind of isn't. You know, that's just what tracks are available to you for whatever reason. Maybe but the train. We'll get to the trains in a moment. Yeah. Okay. The train rush is pretty damn severe in this one. At least when I've played it. I guess there might be some groups where it doesn't happen, but I think the general rule in XX is if the train rush seems severe when you're playing it, without people who really know the game, it's probably going to get a lot worse when people start trying to really push the game to its limits because they have some idea. Quite often there's reasons that somebody wants to push the trains out. Some of that depends on how you like to win the game, what your view of victory in a game is. But if I'm having trouble, if I'm seeing the train rushes, feeling severe playing my solitaire games where nobody is really trying, players aren't usually like, I'm not winning. Let's push the trains out because I don't think it's good for me, but I'm not winning and I want to change that. Whether it's I'm not winning and I've lost, or I'm not winning and maybe I'm doing better. I don't know. But the idea of shaking things up and seeing what happens, I know some players play kind of that way if they're falling behind even just a little bit. I don't tend to play that way. I play a much more conservative type of game. So I think you're more likely to see people who, in certain circumstances, are going to push those trains a little harder than I do. The track selection, I didn't go over that so much. I went over, hey, there's not very many, but they're also kind of weird ones. And that's like a couple of other factors in the game. That's one of those, they're kind of creating more mental noise for me. For example, the lookups on the chart. They're creating more mental noise for me and making it harder for me to make my decisions quickly and easily. I think that goes away to some extent the more you play this one with its kind of weird track selection compared to, if you're used to sort of the more vanilla style of the game. What else? Corporations can invest in other companies. At first I thought, that's kind of a waste. It's not. You can do some neat stuff with that. First of all, it gives you a unique opportunity to tinker with the share value of the corporations in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to. It also, because players can only hold 50% of the corporation, gives you additional places where stocks can park to end up selling out the entire corporation, which happened fairly rarely in this. Like I said, there weren't, at the end of the playthrough, I don't think I said it here, there weren't many cases where I was looking around and saying, there's nothing I want to buy. That happens in other XX games. And maybe not all the time, but I don't think that ever happens here. I think there's always going to be something that's worth buying unless, I don't know, maybe there's some really odd circumstances. So the fact that you have some control and can maybe help boost the investment value of one of your stocks. Another thing is, if you float a corporation and you release all its shares, you're not getting more money in that corporation except by swallowing. Well, one way you can do that is by buying investment shares. And that gives you money in two ways. First of all, when it pays out, you get the cash in your corporation, which can give you some operating expenses. And then you've got a rainy day fund in there. A rainy day fund that you're allowed to cash in during your stock round. Well, not during your stock round, during the special company stock round. But you can also cash it in when you're given an enforced train purchase. Otherwise, a lot of it feels a lot like 1830, to tell you the truth, which is pleasing to me. The stock market, there's some weirdities about the prices on the stock market. I think they need a little bit more looking at. In some cases, like, I remember something, there's this 185 to 190 space that it really kind of stuck in my craw. I'm not sure why that's there or what's up with that. Especially since I think it's a typo. Because the rest, well, maybe not. 185, 175, 170. I don't know what they're trying to say there. I don't have the words to explain it, but I gotta tell you, there's a 185 down here, and most of the prices go down the diagonal. I don't know what the tinkering is and what the thinking there is, and I honestly can't see much point to it except to kind of make me stop and say, "Hey, what's going on here?" Anything else? There's some places where, yeah, like I said, there's some places where the rules kind of have to be nailed down a little better, where it's not clear. Oh, there's one other, the ordering. Yeah. So your ordering for stock round is not based simply on, hey, am sitting to the left of the guy who always does the most, so I'm going to be the first player almost every time, and then it's a fixed order. That's something that always felt funny to me in 18xx. Like, whoever's sitting to my left is going to get priority most of the time, because I do lots of shit. And that's fine. It's fine that I'm always the last person, or am often the last person. But is it really fair that that person is always bonused? And is it really fair that the person to my right is screwed? And yeah, it's just it's kind of a weirdness. This one has a mechanism to generate that. Well, the rules for that mechanism are a little confused. Like, the chart and the rules say different things, and there's a few places where there's rules like that where it's like, I'm not sure what's exactly meant here. But I see a fair amount of promise in this. I mean, I enjoyed myself enough that I would take this to a group. If I had an XX group together, and we kind of tried to get one here, we have people interested in it, but it's just hard to get the time, the right people in the right place at the right time, essentially, with the right amount of time available. Because the other guy, who's probably the most into 18xx in our group, we used to only be able to play with him on Saturday, and he worked at the game store and was basically told, you got to pay attention to the customers, no playing games on Saturday while you're there. And we just don't end up setting up, at any other time. And I think at least one of the other people is, again, a working day kind of guy like me, where it's like, well, it's kind of Saturday or Sunday, and that's the only choices. And Saturday is really more convenient, although it has its problems for me because I'm hungover on Saturdays and in great pain usually now. But Sundays are bad too because I go shopping and in great pain. Bankruptcy rolls. So yeah, this game doesn't appear to have any kind of... The only way the game ends is if you get through the sequence of operating in stock rounds. I mean, obviously people can say we want to quit, but yeah, there is no other exit. And what's nice about that? That's a good question. It means that you're not going to have people who are in a death race against each other to see who ends up losing the game, first, and the other person maybe wins. There are 1830 at the tournaments plays out that way because people view win-loss as a binary choice, as opposed to, I was screwed and somehow I came in second anyway, or whatever, because somebody went bankrupt. And likewise, there's no flexible trying to wait out on the bank running out. I always feel like that's kind of weird, but on the other hand, something always disturbs me no matter what. In this case, I know how many rounds there are. I know exactly how long the game's going to be. I can plan everything a little bit better. That kind of disturbs me too. I can never be happy. Anyway, like I said, as what I have as is, with a couple little tweaks, maybe trying to figure out what's meant more than anything else, interpretations, I feel is something that I would gladly bring and play with other people. What about purchasing it? Well, I've got sort of different tiers of XX games, where I've got a couple that I'm like, I have to have that one. But they're not necessarily the best games, right? So, what is it, 1841 or whatever, It's one of those, I had to have it, no matter what. And I ended up getting a cheap copy that's kind of crappy, and I'm kind of glad with that because I'm not sure it's a particularly good game. It's okay. It's okay, and I would love to have a better copy, and maybe I will someday, but I'm just not that convinced. It's got so much crap and bells and whistles going on. Sort of the top picks for me are 1856, which I love for really twisted reasons, but I love what it does. 1830, and there's another one that was a deep thought that I think, I can't remember which one it is. Might be 1860. I don't remember which one it was. 1864. There was another one that was less in that sort of really has baked into my head where I'm like, you know what? This one is actually really damn good. And I think it holds 3 players rather well, which is kind of neat. I don't think this, from what I see, is going to be in that tier for me. It doesn't hit all the kinds of harshness that I like in an 18XX game. This has a sort of different kind of, more about the terrain control and the use of those tiles that I think this is more in that kind of mid-range. So I have here are the top tier ones. Then there's sort of middle tier that are games I really like. And then there are some ones down there with 1835 trailing the bunch, beautiful components. God, I hate that game. I gotta try it with, there's some rules modifications to it that might fix it, but I hate it. And I know other people are like, oh, it is the best of them. I'm like, it is the most fucking boring. No, I gotta tell you, no, it's not the worst. 1829 was worse. But yeah, and then there's ones that I'm kind of like, yeah, they're just knockoffs. So like 18AL, 18GA, I look at those and I'm like, they're watered down 1830 at best. There's nothing special going on, nothing neat. This adds something, to the 18XX world or whatever. And the designers say it's an 18XX inspired game. I say bullshit. It's an 18XX, damn it. There is no question. I mean, it's more XX than 2038 is, for example. It feels very, very comfortable to me. There's just, the track tiles are a little different. There's a few different little mechanisms, but it's pretty close to the main line for me. More so than some of the others. All right, I have babbled long enough. I don't know how much of value this part is to the designers, but I'm hoping, that, again, that it serves multiple purposes by doing this. That it serves an awareness, hey, here's this game, here's what's going on with it, here's where it's interesting, so that now you'll be on the lookout if you saw something you liked in it. And as well as, hey, here's some things that probably need to be fixed. Here's some definite, simple errors, whatever. All right, up she goes. And I hope I was videoing it.